That night, I heard something crying in the forest. When I finally discovered the source of the crying, everything I thought I knew about life on these mountains changed forever. The worst winter of my logging career turned into something I still can't fully explain. Even now, years later, when I look back on that winter logging contract, I had been a logger for about 15 years. The company needed someone to stay at this remote logging station from December to January to look after the equipment and make sure no one stole the diesel or chainsaws. It wasn't glamorous work, but the pay was good, and I needed the money. The cabin they gave me was simple but sturdy. It had a main room with a wood stove, a small bedroom, and a kitchen with a gas stove. The company always stocked canned goods and supplies. I had a satellite phone in case of emergencies and a radio to check the weather when the conditions allowed. The logging site was deep in the mountains, about 40 miles from the nearest town. The road was rough even in the summer, and by late November, it was nearly impassable. Once the snow started to pile up, I would be completely isolated until spring. The company would send a helicopter with supplies once a month, weather permitting. I didn't mind the isolation. After my marriage fell apart, I'd grown used to being alone. The silence on those mountains was peaceful. No cars, no neighbors, no phones ringing, just the wind whistling through the trees, and occasionally the cry of an owl or a coyote. The first few weeks passed quietly. Every morning I checked the equipment shed and fuel tanks. The rest of the day I chopped firewood, read through old paperbacks I brought with me, and made simple meals. At night, I sat by the stove, listening to the forest prepare for winter. By mid-December, the snow had built up to nearly 3 feet. The temperature dropped quickly, often reaching below freezing at night. Having gone through many harsh winters, I knew exactly what to expect. I had everything I needed to wait it out. The big storm hit just before Christmas. The radio had warned about it 2 days earlier, calling it a major winter event with dangerous cold winds and the potential for whiteout conditions. I spent those 2 days preparing, bringing in more firewood, filling up all the water containers, and checking my supplies. The storm hit fast on Tuesday morning. Within an hour, the wind howled, and snow fell so heavily I couldn't see the trees from the window. The temperature plummeted to -20 degrees, then -30. The wind howled so violently it shook the walls of the cabin. I stayed inside, keeping the fire going. Every couple of hours I checked outside, but all I saw was a blank sheet of white. The storm raged for 2 full days. Snow piled up against the walls of the cabin. Some drifts were over 6 feet high. By the 3rd day, the wind finally started to calm down. The snow continued to fall, but was much lighter. I could even see the trees now, though they were faint behind the thick veil of snow. The temperature was still bone-chilling, probably around -15. That night, after the storm had nearly passed, I was sitting by the stove reading when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a branch breaking under the weight of the snow. But then I heard it again, and it didn't sound like any natural noise I'd ever heard. It was crying. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't quite animal either. The sound was high-pitched and desperate, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. It stopped for a moment, then started again, each time weaker. I sat there, listening, trying to convince myself it was just a coyote or maybe a wounded deer. But something about the sound unsettled me. There was something about it that I couldn't place, almost like the cry of a child. It went on for about 20 minutes, gradually getting softer. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was in trouble out there. And although it was dark and dangerous to go into the woods in these conditions, I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I put on my thickest winter gear, grabbed the brightest flashlight I had, and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a physical force. My breath froze immediately in my mustache. The snow was so deep I could barely move. The cry echoed from the east, near the heavy logs. I followed the sound, weaving through snowdrifts that reached up to my waist. The forest was eerily quiet, except for that desperate cry. I walked about 200 yards before my flashlight caught something in the snow ahead. At first, I thought it was a dark rock or a fallen log, but then it moved slightly, and the crying grew louder. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. What I saw in the beam of the flashlight made me freeze. It was small, maybe the size of a 5-year-old, covered in dark brown fur matted with ice and snow. The little Bigfoot was curled up like a ball beneath a massive pine tree, shaking violently, completely covered in snow. I could see it was a creature I had never seen before. Its face was part human, part ape. Its hands were huge, with long fingers, gripping its own body as the little Bigfoot trembled. The creature looked up at me with large, round black eyes. The crying stopped. The little Bigfoot just stared at me, too weak or too scared to move. I could see it was dying. Its fur was stiff with ice, and its shaking grew weaker. I stood there, feeling like time had stopped, but it was only a few seconds. My mind was struggling to process what I was seeing. Every rational part of me told me this couldn't be real. Bigfoot wasn't real. This had to be something else, maybe a bear cub or some kind of ape that had escaped from somewhere. But I knew what I was looking at. The Bigfoot was just too large for any normal animal. Its face was too human. The look in its eyes was too intelligent. The little Bigfoot whimpered softly. It was even weaker now. Its eyes started to close. I made a decision. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to make it unless I did something. I couldn't just leave it out here. I took off my heavy coat and wrapped it around the little Bigfoot. It didn't resist. Too weak to fight back. A baby Bigfoot weighs around 60 to 70 pounds, much heavier than a child. I picked it up and started trudging back to the cabin, struggling through the thick snow. The little Bigfoot was completely silent now. I could barely feel its breath. I pushed on, terrified that the creature might die before I could get it warm. Getting the little Bigfoot back to the cabin was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The snow was deep, the weight of the Bigfoot, the bone-chilling cold, all of it worked against me. When I finally reached the cabin door, my hands were burning, and I could barely breathe. I kicked the door open and carried the little Bigfoot inside. The warmth of the cabin hit us both. I laid the little Bigfoot down on the floor near the stove and removed the coat wrapped around it. In the light of the cabin, I could finally see what I had found. The little Bigfoot was definitely very young, maybe no more than a couple of years old, if I had to guess. Its body looked like a small, muscular child, but it was completely covered in thick brown fur except for its face, palms, and soles. The face was the most unsettling part. The little Bigfoot had a flat nose, a high forehead, and lips that looked almost human. Its eyes were closed, its breath was shallow and rapid. Ice clung to the fur all over its body. The little Bigfoot had severe hypothermia, and it probably wouldn't survive much longer without help. I grabbed a towel and began rubbing the little Bigfoot, trying to dry its fur and get its blood flowing. At first, the little Bigfoot didn't react, just lying still. But after a few minutes, it let out a soft noise and its eyes opened. I filled the largest basin I had with warm water and started washing the ice off its fur. The little Bigfoot didn't resist. It just lay there, occasionally letting out soft whimpers that broke my heart. It took over an hour to warm up the little Bigfoot's body temperature. I wrapped it in all the blankets I had and kept the stove burning hot. Gradually, the little Bigfoot's breathing became stronger and more regular. The shivering eased off. Around midnight, the little Bigfoot finally opened its large black eyes and looked at me. It really looked at me. The little Bigfoot didn't cry or act aggressively. It just stared at me with an intelligent expression that made me uneasy. I warmed up some canned soup and poured it into a bowl near the little Bigfoot. The little Bigfoot sniffed it but didn't eat. Next, I tried offering it some water. The little Bigfoot drank a little, carefully licking it clean. I sat back against the wall, just staring at the impossible thing in my cabin. The little Bigfoot stared back. We stayed like that for a long while. Neither of us seemed sure what to do next. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't. The little Bigfoot dozed fitfully, making small sounds before falling asleep. Every time the little Bigfoot moved, I tensed, unsure of what to expect. The later it got, the more I began to reflect on the situation I had found myself in. There was some strange creature in my cabin. A little Bigfoot, a creature that, by everything I had been taught, shouldn't exist, and I had no idea what to do with it. Practical questions started to pile up. What had the little Bigfoot eaten? Where were its parents? How had it ended up alone in the middle of a snowstorm? And most importantly, what was I going to do with it? I thought about calling the company using my satellite phone, but what would I even say if I found a baby Sasquatch? They would think I had lost my mind from being isolated for too long. Even if they believed me, what would happen then? Scientists would come, maybe even the government. This little Bigfoot would be caged, poked, and prodded, stared at while it lay there wrapped in a blanket. I knew I couldn't do that. The little Bigfoot was clearly very intelligent. The way it looked at me was unlike any animal I had ever seen. This was a creature that thought and felt. By morning, I had made my decision. I would take care of the little Bigfoot until it was strong enough, and then I would try to figure out how to get it back to where it came from, back to its family, if it had one. The little Bigfoot woke up as the sun started to shine through the window. The little Bigfoot slowly sat up, still wrapped in a blanket, and looked around the cabin. Its eyes landed on me, and for a moment, I was afraid it might panic, but the little Bigfoot didn't. It just looked at me with those intelligent eyes. Then the little Bigfoot made a small noise, almost like a question. I warmed up some oatmeal and tried offering it to the little Bigfoot. This time, the little Bigfoot ate. Not much, just a few careful bites, but it was something. The little Bigfoot drank some water too. Over the next few hours, I learned a few things about my unexpected guest. The little Bigfoot was definitely a child, maybe not older than 3 or 4 years old in human terms. It was curious about everything in the cabin, gently touching everything when I let it explore. The little Bigfoot was surprisingly clean and didn't have the foul smell I had imagined. It seemed to understand that the stove was hot and dangerous, so it kept its distance without me needing to warn it. Most importantly, the little Bigfoot didn't seem afraid of me anymore. Cautious, yes, but not terrified. The little Bigfoot started to follow my routines. A few days later, a strange habit developed. The little Bigfoot would wake up at the same time as me, eating simple things like oatmeal, canned fruit, and nuts. The little Bigfoot never touched the meat, turning away whenever I tried to offer it. The little Bigfoot remained surprisingly gentle and quiet. It never tore up things or made a mess. When the little Bigfoot needed to relieve itself, it would go to the door and make noise until I let it outside. The little Bigfoot would crawl into the snow, do its business, and come right back. I began to feel comfortable with the little Bigfoot around. It was clear the little Bigfoot wasn't dangerous. It was just a lost child trying to survive. The little Bigfoot loved the warmth of the stove. It would sit as close as possible, sometimes carefully reaching out to feel the heat. It also loved my blankets, wrapping them around itself and sometimes covering its head. I tried not to think too much about the bigger questions. Where did this little Bigfoot come from? Was there another one out there? Was its family looking for it? Those questions were too big and too terrifying to answer. By the 4th day, something happened that changed everything. I was outside chopping wood when I heard the little Bigfoot's panicked cry from inside the cabin. The little Bigfoot was at the window, pointing towards the trees. Just then, I saw them. 5 wolves were moving through the snow toward the cabin. The bigger ones, likely drawn by the scent of food or perhaps sensing the presence of something weak. I grabbed the axe and rushed back inside. The wolves saw me and stopped. They stood about 45 meters away, spread out in a loose line. I stepped inside and locked the door. The little Bigfoot was clearly terrified, whimpering softly. It came closer to me, pressing against my legs. The wolves circled the cabin for a while, but they wouldn't leave. They knew something was here. I could see them through the window, pacing back and forth, occasionally stopping to stare at the cabin. As the night wore on, they grew bolder. One wolf climbed onto the porch and scratched at the door. The little Bigfoot cried out in fear, and the younger Bigfoot grabbed my leg with surprisingly strong hands. I slammed the door and shouted, and the wolf backed away, but it wouldn't leave. None of them would. We spent a tense night. The wolves took turns checking the cabin, scratching at the door and circling the windows. I kept the fire blazing and tried to make as much noise as possible whenever they got too close. The little Bigfoot stayed right next to me the entire time. It seemed to understand that we were in danger. When I checked the window, the little Bigfoot followed me. When I sat down to rest, the little Bigfoot sat next to me, pressing against my side. By morning, the pack of wolves was still there. They had made a den in the snow and were clearly planning to wait us out. I had to do something. We had food and water, but we couldn't stay trapped forever. And those wolves weren't going to give up easily. I loaded my rifle. I didn't want to shoot unless I had to, but I needed to drive them off. The little Bigfoot's eyes widened as I prepared to go outside. As soon as I opened the door, the nearest wolf lunged at me. I fired a shot over its head, and the wolf yelped, staggering back. The other wolves scattered into the brush. I fired 2 more shots into the air and yelled as loud as I could. The wolves backed away, but I could still see them watching from the trees. I stayed outside, making noise and occasionally firing a shot, for about an hour. Eventually, the pack gave up and melted back into the forest. I waited another hour to make sure they were really gone before going back inside. The little Bigfoot ran to me as I stepped through the door. It let out a relieved cry and even wrapped its arms around my legs. It was a gesture so human that it shocked me. That's when I realized something important. The little Bigfoot trusted me. The little Bigfoot saw me as its protector, maybe even as a family member. Over the next 2 weeks, the little Bigfoot grew stronger and more confident. Its fur thickened, becoming shinier and fuller. The little Bigfoot gained weight and became more active. It even began to play, something I never expected. The little Bigfoot would pick up anything it found around the cabin and examine it, making soft, curious noises. It became especially fond of a red knit hat. I told the little Bigfoot to put it on, and it looked at me as if asking if it looked good. I found myself talking to the little Bigfoot as if it were a child. The little Bigfoot couldn't speak, but it made different sounds that seemed to have distinct meanings. A soft tap meant satisfaction. A sharper sound meant it wanted something. A low growl meant the little Bigfoot was anxious or scared. Its favorite time was the evening after dinner. The little Bigfoot would sit by the fire with me, wrapped in blankets, and we would simply exist together in peaceful silence. Sometimes, the little Bigfoot would reach out and gently touch my hand, as if to make sure I was still there. I began teaching the little Bigfoot simple things without thinking too much about it. The little Bigfoot learned how to help me with small tasks. It would bring firewood from the pile on the porch, always being very careful with each piece. The little Bigfoot also learned to recognize which food was in which can. The little Bigfoot even began trying to mimic what I did, like sweeping the floor with a broom far too large for its small frame. It was during this time that I really started to understand what a young Bigfoot was. It wasn't just an animal, and it wasn't exactly human, but something in between. The little Bigfoot had intelligence, emotions, and personality. The little Bigfoot could be playful, affectionate, scared, happy, or curious. I had never wanted children, but caring for this little Bigfoot awakened something in me I hadn't known. Existed a protective instinct, a need to keep the little Bigfoot safe and healthy. The little Bigfoot developed habits that fascinated me. Every morning, the little Bigfoot would wake up before dawn and spend time grooming its fur. It would sit cross-legged on the floor, carefully untangling any knots or bits of debris in its thick coat. The little Bigfoot's hands were incredibly dexterous for such a small creature. I started keeping track of everything the little Bigfoot did. The little Bigfoot was extremely clean, almost obsessively so. If it spilled something while eating, it would make distressed noises until I helped clean it up. The little Bigfoot even had its own spot in the cabin where it would neatly arrange its blankets before sleeping. Food became an interesting challenge. The little Bigfoot was clearly herbivorous, refusing all the meat I offered, but it had strong preferences. It loved anything sweet, like canned peaches or dried fruit. The little Bigfoot would eat nuts by the handful, cracking them open with surprising strength. It also liked vegetables, especially carrots and potatoes. One morning, I decided to let the little Bigfoot try a sip of coffee. The little Bigfoot scrunched its face in disgust, and then spat it out loudly, causing me to laugh. It clearly thought I'd offered something terrible. The little Bigfoot's strength continued to amaze me. One afternoon, I was struggling to move a heavy box of supplies, and the little Bigfoot simply walked over and lifted it as though it weighed nothing. The little Bigfoot carried the box according to my instructions, gently placing it down, then looking at me as if to say, "That was easy." But what truly surprised me was how gentle the little Bigfoot was. It would pick up delicate things like my reading glasses or pencils and handle them with the utmost care. The little Bigfoot seemed to understand that some things were fragile and needed to be touched gently. It was endlessly curious about how things worked. The little Bigfoot would watch me work with intense focus. Its large, dark eyes tracked every movement. Then, the little Bigfoot would try to imitate what I had done. I showed the little Bigfoot how to start the fire in the stove, and it watched closely. The little Bigfoot couldn't start the fire on its own, but it learned how to bring me the wood and stack it properly before I lit it. The little Bigfoot seemed proud when the fire caught well. The little Bigfoot was also fascinated by my tools. It would sit for hours examining a hammer or a wrench, turning them over in its large hands, trying to figure out what they were for. When I used a tool, the little Bigfoot would make excited sounds when it realized what it was for. I started letting the little Bigfoot help with simple repairs around the cabin. The little Bigfoot could hand me the right tools when I asked, carefully picking out exactly what I needed after inspecting them. It learned to hold a board in place while I hammered nails. The little Bigfoot couldn't work on its own, but it understood the concept of helping. At first, books confused the little Bigfoot. It would pick up my paperback books and look at them with a puzzled expression. Of course, the little Bigfoot couldn't read, but it seemed to enjoy the pictures on the covers. I would sit with the little Bigfoot and we'd look through the books together, pointing at the pictures and naming everything. The little Bigfoot would make soft noises, as though trying to repeat the words I said. One evening, the little Bigfoot did something that amazed me. We had food and water, but we couldn't stay stuck here forever, and those wolves weren't going to give up easily. I loaded my rifle. I didn't want to shoot them unless I had to, but I needed to drive them off. The little Bigfoot's eyes widened as I got ready to go outside. The moment I opened the door, the nearest wolf lunged at me. I fired a shot over its head, and the wolf yelped, staggering back. The other wolves scattered into the brush. I fired 2 more shots into the air and yelled as loudly as I could. The wolves backed away, but I could still see them watching from the trees. I stayed outside, making noise and occasionally firing a shot for about an hour. Finally, the pack gave up and disappeared into the forest. I waited another hour to make sure they were really gone before heading back inside. The little Bigfoot ran to me as I stepped through the door. It let out a relieved cry and even wrapped its arms around my legs. It was a gesture so human that it shocked me. That's when I realized something important. The little Bigfoot trusted me. The little Bigfoot saw me as its protector, maybe even as a family member. Over the next 2 weeks, the little Bigfoot grew stronger and more confident. Its fur thickened, becoming shinier and fuller. The little Bigfoot gained weight and became more active. It even started to play, something I never expected. The little Bigfoot would pick up anything it found around the cabin and examine it, making soft, curious noises. It became especially fond of a red knit hat. I told the little Bigfoot to put it on, and it looked at me as if asking if it looked good. I found myself talking to the little Bigfoot as if it were a child. The little Bigfoot couldn't speak, but it made different sounds that seemed to have distinct meanings. A soft tap meant satisfaction. A sharper sound meant it wanted something. A low growl meant the little Bigfoot was anxious or scared. Its favorite time was the evening after dinner. The little Bigfoot would sit by the fire with me wrapped in blankets, and we would simply exist together in peaceful silence. Sometimes, the little Bigfoot would reach out and gently touch my hand, as if to make sure I was still there. I began teaching the little Bigfoot simple things without thinking too much about it. The little Bigfoot learned how to help me with small tasks. It would bring firewood from the pile on the porch, always being very careful with each piece. The little Bigfoot also learned to recognize which food was in which can. The little Bigfoot even began trying to mimic what I did, like sweeping the floor with a broom far too large for its small frame. It was during this time that I really started to understand what a young Bigfoot was. It wasn't just an animal, and it wasn't exactly human, but something in between. The little Bigfoot had intelligence, emotions, and personality. The little Bigfoot could be playful, affectionate, scared, happy, or curious. I had never wanted children, but caring for this little Bigfoot awakened something in me I hadn't known existed, a protective instinct, a need to keep the little Bigfoot safe and healthy. The little Bigfoot developed habits that fascinated me. Every morning, the little Bigfoot would wake up before dawn and spend time grooming its fur. It would sit cross-legged on the floor, carefully untangling any knots or bits of debris in its thick coat. The little Bigfoot's hands were incredibly dexterous for such a small creature. I started keeping track of everything the little Bigfoot did. The little Bigfoot was extremely clean, almost obsessively so. If it spilled something while eating, it would make distressed noises until I helped clean it up. The little Bigfoot even had its own spot in the cabin where it would neatly arrange its blankets before sleeping. Food became an interesting challenge. The little Bigfoot was clearly herbivorous, refusing all the meat I offered. but it had strong preferences. It loved anything sweet, like canned peaches or dried fruit. The little Bigfoot would eat nuts by the handful, cracking them open with surprising strength. It also liked vegetables, especially carrots and potatoes. One morning, I decided to let the little Bigfoot try a sip of coffee. The little Bigfoot scrunched its face in disgust, then spat it out loudly, causing me to laugh. It clearly thought I'd offered something terrible. The little Bigfoot's strength continued to amaze me. One afternoon, I was struggling to move a heavy box of supplies, and the little Bigfoot simply walked over and lifted it as though it weighed nothing. The little Bigfoot carried the box according to my instructions, gently placing it down, then looking at me as if to say, "That was easy." But what truly surprised me was how gentle the little Bigfoot was. It would pick up delicate things like my reading glasses or pencils and handle them with the utmost care. The little Bigfoot seemed to understand that some things were fragile and needed to be touched gently. It was endlessly curious about how things worked. The little Bigfoot would watch me work with intense focus. Its large, dark eyes tracked every movement. Then, the little Bigfoot would try to imitate what I had done. I showed the little Bigfoot how to start the fire in the stove, and it watched closely. The little Bigfoot couldn't start the fire on its own, but it learned how to bring me the wood and stack it properly before I lit it. The little Bigfoot seemed proud when the fire caught well. The little Bigfoot was also fascinated by my tools. It would sit for hours examining a hammer or a wrench, turning them over in its large hands, trying to figure out what they were for. When I used a tool, the little Bigfoot would make excited sounds when it realized what it was for. I started letting the little Bigfoot help with simple repairs around the cabin. The little Bigfoot could hand me the right tools when I asked, carefully picking out exactly what I needed after inspecting them. It learned to hold a board in place while I hammered nails. The little Bigfoot couldn't work on its own, but it understood the concept of helping. At first, books confused the little Bigfoot. It would pick up my paperback books and look at them with a puzzled expression. Of course, the little Bigfoot couldn't read, but it seemed to enjoy the pictures on the covers. I would sit with the little Bigfoot and we'd look through the books together, pointing at the pictures and naming everything. The little Bigfoot would make soft noises, as though trying to repeat the words I said. One evening, the little Bigfoot did something that amazed me. We were stuck for 4 days this time. The snow piled up so thick that once it stopped falling, I couldn't even open the door. I had to climb out through the window and start digging. The little Bigfoot watched me work, clearly wanting to help but unable to fit through the window. When I finally got the door open and stepped out, the little Bigfoot ran to me, embracing me and letting out a relieved cry. The little Bigfoot helped me dig a path to the equipment shed and the outhouse. Now strong enough to move massive amounts of snow, the little Bigfoot and I worked together, clearing everything in half the time it would have taken me alone. It was during those long, endless winter days that I truly began to understand how intelligent the little Bigfoot really was. The little Bigfoot didn't just learn by mimicking. It could solve problems, think through situations. One day, I was trying to reach something on a high shelf that I couldn't quite reach. The little Bigfoot watched me struggle for a while, then left the room. It came back, pulled over a chair, placed it where I needed it, and looked at me as if to say, "Here you go." The little Bigfoot understood the concept of using tools to solve a problem. That's not something most animals can do. A young Bigfoot showed reasoning ability, planning, and an understanding of cause and effect. Another time, I dropped my gloves in the snow and didn't realize it until much later. When I went back to find them, they were gone. I searched everywhere, wondering where they could have gone. That night I found them. The little Bigfoot had brought them inside, dried them by the stove, and neatly placed them next to the door where I could see them. It had recognized that they were important to me and had taken care of them. The little Bigfoot also demonstrated emotional intelligence that continued to amaze me. One day, I came down with a bad cold, and the little Bigfoot brought me water without me asking, kept the fire going, and even brought me food. It sat with me all day, making soft, affectionate sounds, keeping me company. The little Bigfoot understood empathy. It could tell when I was happy, sad, or anxious, and would react accordingly. When I was happy, the little Bigfoot would be joyful too. When I was sad, the little Bigfoot would gently comfort me. I wasn't caring for a pet or even a wild animal. A young Bigfoot was, in every meaningful way, a person. The little Bigfoot had thoughts, feelings, and personality. It had likes, dislikes, and opinions. The little Bigfoot made choices based on reason, not just instinct. About 3 weeks after finding the little Bigfoot, I started noticing things outside the cabin. There were enormous tracks in the snow, much larger than the little Bigfoot's feet. The trees had deep scratches high above my reach. There were piles of branches arranged in strange patterns. Something out there. Something big. The little Bigfoot noticed it too. It often stood at the window for long periods, staring into the forest. Its behavior started changing. The little Bigfoot became more alert, more anxious. At night, it wouldn't sleep unless I was right next to it. Then, one morning, I found something on the porch that made my blood run cold. A fresh deer leg, carefully placed right in front of the door. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. Someone or something had deliberately left it there. The little Bigfoot saw the deer meat and let out an excited cry. It tried to approach it, but I stopped the little Bigfoot. I didn't know what this gift meant or who had left it. I took the meat inside and stored it. A few days later, more gifts appeared. Roots and branches, even though everything was covered in snow, and a rabbit that had been killed and cleaned. There were pieces of tree bark that the little Bigfoot was eager to eat. Someone was feeding us. Someone knew the little Bigfoot was here. The little Bigfoot grew more restless. It paced by the window, making quiet calls. It was calling to someone or something. I knew what was happening. The little Bigfoot's family had found us. They were out there, trying to communicate. One night, I woke up to strange sounds outside. Low, echoing calls rang through the forest. They weren't like anything I had ever heard before. Too loud for a human, too detailed for any animal. The little Bigfoot was awake too, sitting up, listening, and fidgeting. The little Bigfoot responded with soft noises, too quiet for anything outside to hear. The calls went on for about an hour, then stopped. The next morning, I found more signs around the cabin. Huge footprints, bigger than dinner plates, circling the building. Something out there was massive. A few days after those night calls, I had to check on one of the equipment sheds about half a mile from the cabin. I usually went alone, but this time the little Bigfoot insisted on coming with me. It wedged itself between me and the door, making desperate noises, clearly not wanting to be left behind. I agreed, and we trudged through the snow together. The little Bigfoot stayed close by, alert and watchful. Halfway to the shed, the little Bigfoot suddenly stopped and made a small warning sound. I stopped too and looked around. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed movement about 45 meters ahead. A massive black bear blocking the path to the shed. It was probably one of the last bears awake before hibernation, maybe very hungry. The bear saw us and stood up on its hind legs. The bear was huge, at least 6 feet tall when it stood. The little Bigfoot moved in front of me, doing its best to protect me, letting out a sound I had never heard before. A deep, guttural growl that seemed impossible for such a young Bigfoot to make. The little Bigfoot was trying to protect me, standing between me and the bear. The bear backed away, dropping back onto all fours, clearly surprised by the little Bigfoot's aggressive stance. The little Bigfoot growled again, even louder this time, and started moving toward the bear, making itself look bigger and more intimidating. I was afraid the bear would charge and kill us both. But then, something miraculous happened. The bear backed away. It looked uneasy, confused by a creature it had likely never encountered before. The little Bigfoot kept advancing, continuing to growl, and finally, the bear turned and lumbered off into the forest. The little Bigfoot stood there for a while, making sure the bear had truly left. Then, the little Bigfoot shrank down, becoming small again, and ran toward me. It was trembling, clearly terrified, but still brave enough to face a creature 3 times its size. I knelt down and hugged the little Bigfoot. A young Bigfoot had saved both of us. The little Bigfoot let out soft, tired cries and leaned against me, exhausted from the confrontation. We made our way back to the cabin without checking the shed. It could wait. The little Bigfoot needed rest, and I needed to process what had just happened. This little Bigfoot, this young creature, had risked its life to protect me. That night, something else happened. I was still tense from the bear encounter, and the little Bigfoot was restless. It kept going to the window, looking outside, making quiet sounds. Around midnight, I heard them. Footsteps, heavy footsteps circling the cabin. These weren't the light steps of wolves or the cautious tread of mountain lions. These were two-legged footsteps, a creature walking on two legs, but much heavier. The little Bigfoot stood completely still, listening intently. It wasn't exactly scared, but it was tense, like it was waiting for something. I grabbed my rifle and moved to the window. Under the moonlight reflecting off the snow, I could see them. 3 massive figures moving around the clearing. They kept their distance, probably around 100 meters away, but they were definitely there. Definitely Bigfoot adults. Each one was massive, standing at least 8 to 9 feet tall. They moved with a fluidity that seemed impossible for such large creatures, leaving almost no trace in the snow. The little Bigfoot made a soft sound. Not loud, but one of the adults stopped and turned toward the cabin. The adult Bigfoot responded with a similar sound. They were communicating. The little Bigfoot was talking to its family, and they were answering. This went on for about 20 minutes. The little Bigfoot would make sounds, and the adults would respond. They never got too close to the cabin, maintaining that respectful distance, but clearly, they were checking on the little Bigfoot, making sure it was okay. Finally, the adults turned and disappeared into the forest. The little Bigfoot watched them go, making small, sad noises. The little Bigfoot looked up at me with those big, round eyes, and I could see the conflict in them. It wanted to be with its family, but it also didn't want to leave me. I hugged the little Bigfoot tightly that night. We both knew our time together was limited. The little Bigfoot's family was out there, watching and waiting. Soon, I would have to let the little Bigfoot go. The next few days were different. I started preparing the little Bigfoot to return to its family. I took it outside more often, for longer periods. The little Bigfoot needed to reacquaint itself with the cold, with living in the forest full time. The little Bigfoot seemed to understand what was happening. The little Bigfoot grew clingier, following me everywhere, constantly touching me to make sure I was nearby. At night, the little Bigfoot would curl up next to me, making soft, sorrowful sounds before falling asleep. I found myself memorizing everything about the little Bigfoot. Its thick, warm fur, the sounds it made, each one carrying its own meaning. The way the little Bigfoot would tilt its head when curious about something, the tenderness and care in those sturdy hands. One day, we encountered the Bigfoot adults again. This time, they were closer, about 150 feet away. The little Bigfoot saw them and let out excited cries, taking a few steps toward them before looking back at me hesitantly. I nodded at the little Bigfoot, trying to reassure it. The little Bigfoot took a few more steps but stopped again. It was torn between 2 worlds, 2 families. One of the adult Bigfoots, smaller than the others and possibly a younger one, made a soft call. The little Bigfoot responded but stayed close to me. The adult Bigfoot sat down in the snow, trying to appear less threatening, and continued calling softly. The little Bigfoot looked at me again, then slowly moved toward the adult Bigfoot. It stopped about 10 feet away, and the 2 Bigfoots simply stared at each other. After a while, the little Bigfoot came back to me, but something had changed. The little Bigfoot had briefly reunited with its family. It knew it was time. I made the most of the last days we had together. I taught the little Bigfoot everything I could about surviving in the winter forest. The little Bigfoot taught me more about its natural abilities. It could move through the forest nearly silently, find food and water in places I would never have thought to look. The little Bigfoot could read the signs of animals and weather patterns with perfect accuracy. One afternoon, the little Bigfoot led me to a spot I had never seen before. A small cave hidden behind fallen trees and snow. Inside, it was dry and sheltered from the wind. The little Bigfoot showed me how it had likely survived before the storm, a type of shelter it needed. The little Bigfoot also became more independent in these days. The little Bigfoot would leave the cabin for short periods, always returning, but clearly testing its survival skills outside. It was getting ready to leave. I started leaving the door open at night so the little Bigfoot could come and go freely. Sometimes I'd wake up, and the little Bigfoot would be out in the forest with its family. But the little Bigfoot always returned in the morning, curling up by the fire as if nothing had changed. We both knew this couldn't last forever. The little Bigfoot needed to be with its kind, and I had to let it go, no matter how hard it would be. I spent the next few days thinking carefully about what I needed to do. The little Bigfoot's family was clearly out there looking for it. They knew where the little Bigfoot was. But they didn't attack or try to intrude. They were patiently waiting. Perhaps they were afraid of me, or afraid of the cabin. Maybe they didn't understand that I wasn't keeping the little Bigfoot captive. The little Bigfoot was healthy now, strong enough to survive out there. The little Bigfoot didn't need me anymore. Keeping it here was selfish. It was wrong to separate the little one from its true family, but the thought of letting the little Bigfoot go filled me with fear. Not because I feared for its safety, but because I had become attached. This little Bigfoot had become important to me in ways I never expected, but I knew what I had to do. I started preparing the little Bigfoot for the outside world. I wrapped the little Bigfoot up and began taking it outside for longer periods, allowing it to reacquaint itself with the cold. The little Bigfoot seemed to understand that something was changing. It looked at me with those large eyes, as if asking what was going on. One sunny day, about a month after I found the little Bigfoot, I decided it was time. I put an old sweater on the little Bigfoot, one I'd cut down to fit. The little Bigfoot looked ridiculous in the sweater, but at least it helped keep it warm. It didn't resist when I put it on. We went outside together. The little Bigfoot held my hand as we walked out of the cabin and into the woods. I had an inkling of where those giant tracks had come from, a direction I'd seen movement in the trees several times. We walked for about 20 minutes, the little Bigfoot's tiny hand in mine. The little Bigfoot kept looking up at me, making quiet sounds, almost questioning. Finally, I stopped in a clearing. The tall trees surrounded us on all sides. The snow here was deep and untouched, with only our footprints remaining. I knelt down beside the little Bigfoot. It looked at me, and I swear I saw sadness in its eyes. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a creature that doesn't understand your words that you're sending it back to its family? That you care for it, but this is the best thing? I just hugged the little Bigfoot. The little Bigfoot clung tightly to me, its small, strong hands wrapped around my neck. Then I stood up, pointed toward the forest, and gently nudged the little Bigfoot in that direction. The little Bigfoot took a few steps, then stopped and looked back at me. I gestured for it to go. The little Bigfoot took a few more steps, still looking behind. Just then I heard it. A sound coming from the trees ahead, deep and rumbling, almost like a voice, but not quite. The little Bigfoot's head whipped around. It let out an excited cry and started moving toward the sound. From the shadows between the trees, something appeared. A massive Bigfoot stepped into the clearing, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in thick, reddish-brown fur. The shoulders were broad, arms long and strong. But what struck me most was its face. The Bigfoot had an almost human-like expression, and at that moment, the adult Bigfoot looked like any mother reunited with a lost child. The little Bigfoot ran toward the larger Bigfoot, letting out high-pitched cries of joy. The adult Bigfoot knelt down, wrapping the little Bigfoot in its massive arms, pulling it close. I stood frozen, witnessing this reunion. The adult Bigfoot rocked the little one back and forth, making low, rumbling sounds. The little Bigfoot clung to its mother, its tiny hands buried deep in the thick fur. After a long while, the adult Bigfoot looked up at me. Its intelligent black eyes met mine across the clearing. I didn't know what to do. A part of me wanted to run. This Bigfoot could easily kill me if it wanted, but I stood my ground. The mother Bigfoot gently set the little one down and stood up. The Bigfoot took a few steps toward me. I tried to suppress the instinct to back away. The adult Bigfoot stopped about 10 feet from me. We stood there, staring at each other, for what felt like an eternity. Then the mother Bigfoot did something I didn't expect. She reached behind her and pulled something from a natural pouch or fold in her fur. The adult Bigfoot extended a massive hand toward me. In her palm was a stone, not just any stone, but one that had been shaped. It was smooth, oval, with markings carved into it. Intentional markings, not natural ones. The mother Bigfoot held it out to me, clearly offering it. I slowly stepped forward and took the stone. It was warm from her body heat. The mother Bigfoot made a soft noise, then did something even more surprising. She lowered her head, a gesture of respect or gratitude. I nodded in return, unsure what else to do. The little Bigfoot moved closer to me. Then, it hugged my leg again, making soft noises. Afterward, the little Bigfoot turned back to its mother. The mother Bigfoot scooped up the little one, cradling it against her side like a mother would. The adult Bigfoot looked at me once more, then turned and walked back into the forest. I watched them disappear into the shadows between the trees. The little Bigfoot looked back at me over its mother's shoulder until I couldn't see them anymore. I stood there for a long time in the clearing, holding the carved stone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A few days later, I returned to the cabin. The stone was still warm in my hand. When I went inside, I sat by the stove and examined it closely. The carvings were definitely deliberate. They looked like some kind of symbol, or maybe a rudimentary form of writing. I didn't understand what they meant, but someone had created them with purpose and intelligence. The mother Bigfoot hadn't just given me an ordinary stone. The adult Bigfoot had given me a gift, something meaningful, a thank you for caring for her child. The cabin felt emptier without the little Bigfoot. I had grown used to its presence, the soft noises it made, and how it would sit next to me by the fire. For the first time in years, I felt lonely. Over the next few days, I kept finding small mementos that reminded me of the little Bigfoot. A blanket the little Bigfoot loved, still holding the shape of where it slept, claw marks on the floor where it had played, the red knit hat the little Bigfoot always liked to wear. But I also kept finding gifts outside: fresh meat, roots, even some dried fruit that tasted surprisingly good. The family was still watching, still providing, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I started leaving food out for them too, leftovers when I had them. Tools I no longer needed, but thought they might find useful. We had developed a strange relationship, these giant creatures who provided food, and I. Sometimes at night, I would hear low calls from a distance. I'd step outside and listen, and occasionally I'd respond. It wasn't complicated, just a simple way of letting them know I was still here and doing fine. About a week after the last meeting, I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. It was a little Bigfoot peeking out from behind a tree. The young Bigfoot saw me and let out an excited cry, waving a tiny hand. I waved back. The mother Bigfoot appeared, placing a gentle hand on the little one's shoulder. The adult Bigfoot nodded at me, then led the little one back into the forest. They were checking on me, making sure I was okay. Just as I had cared for the little one, now they were looking out for me. Weeks passed, and I realized the mother and little one weren't alone. I started noticing more signs of a larger group, tracks of different sizes, different types of movement. There was a family out there, maybe even a small community. They moved through the forest around my cabin like ghosts. I only saw them when they wanted to be seen. One figure watched from a tree. A group of them moved through a distant clearing at dusk. They were always there, but always at a certain distance, except for the little one. Sometimes, the young Bigfoot would come close, always with an adult nearby, but the little one would venture out to leave me small gifts or just wave at me. The young Bigfoot hadn't forgotten me. I had seen the little one playing with what must have been siblings, 3 little Bigfoots rolling in the snow, wrestling and chasing each other. They moved with surprising grace for such large bodies, perfectly adapted to this harsh environment. The little one saw me watching and ran to the edge of the clearing, excited to show me its family. The young Bigfoot pointed at the others and made noises as if telling me about them. The mother Bigfoot appeared, making a soft call. The young one reluctantly turned back, but not before waving goodbye to me once more. I felt like I had been given a fleeting glimpse into a world most people don't even believe exists. These creatures had families, relationships, culture. They weren't just animals. They were people in their own way. As winter began to give way to early spring, I spent more time reflecting on everything that had happened. I had gone from not believing in Bigfoot's existence to living with one, and then becoming part of a Bigfoot community in a strange way. The biggest lesson I had learned was about intelligence and emotion. These Bigfoot creatures feel everything deeply, the relief of a mother when she finds her child, the affection the little one still holds for me, even after reuniting with its family, the gratitude they have for my help. All of it is genuine and profound. I think about what would happen if the world knew about them. Scientists would come, hunters, the curious. These large creatures would be studied, tracked, and possibly captured. Their peaceful existence on these mountains would be destroyed. So, I decided I would never tell anyone the whole story. Let people believe that Bigfoot is just a legend. These creatures deserve their privacy and freedom. The gifts kept coming throughout the end of winter, not just food. One time, I found a beautiful deer antler, carved with the same symbols as the stone I had been given. Another time, there was a bundle of herbs that helped when I had a bad cough. They cared for me the way I had cared for their baby. When the company's helicopter finally arrived in early March, bringing the replacement crew and supplies, the pilot was amazed at how healthy I looked. Most guys who spend the winter alone at a remote logging station leave looking haggard, starved, and desperate for human contact. I was the opposite. I had gained weight thanks to all the delicious food the Bigfoot family had provided. I was calm and at peace. The pilot asked if anything interesting had happened. I told him it had been a quiet winter, just me in the forest. While we were loading the supplies onto the helicopter, I looked toward the forest. A few massive figures appeared in the shadows between the trees. They were watching, making sure I was leaving safely. I waved. One of the smaller figures, smaller than the others, stepped forward and waved back. It was the little Bigfoot, bidding me goodbye. Then they faded into the forest, and just like that, they were gone. I left the mountains that day, but I never truly left them behind. The carved stone still sat in my pocket wherever I went. Sometimes I would hold it and think back to those strange weeks when I was a part of something extraordinary. I went back to my regular logging work, moving to different locations, living my life. But every winter, I thought about the little Bigfoot and its family. I wondered if they were all right, if the little Bigfoot still remembered me. 10 years later, I was working at a site about 30 miles from where I had spent that winter, close enough that sometimes I'd drive out to the old logging station on my days off. The cabin was still there, maintained by the company for future winter caretakers. Last week, I walked out to the clearing where I had returned the little Bigfoot to its mother. It looked exactly the same, as if time had stopped there. As I stood there, reminiscing, I heard a sound from above. A low call that I recognized immediately. From the darkness, a Bigfoot appeared, but it wasn't a baby anymore. It was a full-grown Bigfoot, about 6 feet tall, strong and healthy. Its fur was reddish-brown, and its eyes, which I recognized instantly, met mine. It walked toward me, confident yet cautious. We stood facing each other across the same clearing, just like that day 10 years ago. Then the young Bigfoot did something that brought tears to my eyes. The young Bigfoot reached into its fur and pulled out a small carved stone. It held it out to me, just like its mother had done all those years ago. I took the stone. It was warm, smooth, and finely carved. A gift, a thank you, a way to say that Bigfoot remembered me. I pulled out the original carved stone I had kept all these years. The Bigfoot's eyes widened, and it made a soft, surprised, and joyful sound. We stood there for a moment, two creatures from different worlds connected by a brief moment where one helped the other survive. Finally, the Bigfoot turned and walked away. But before it disappeared into the forest, the young Bigfoot looked back and raised a massive hand. I raised mine in return. Then the Bigfoot vanished, fading into the forest as though it had never been there. But I knew the truth. I had known it ever since that night. I heard the crying in the woods and saw the little Bigfoot freezing in the snow. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in Bigfoot. I tell them that I believe in the mysteries, in things beyond our understanding. I tell them the world is bigger and stranger than we think. But I never tell them about the little Bigfoot I saved, about living with that baby Bigfoot for a month, about the family that took care of me afterward, about the carved stones I kept in the box on the truck. Some stories shouldn't be shared. Some experiences should be kept secret, protected, away from a world that can't understand them. Now I know that we're not alone on these mountains, that there are intelligent creatures sharing this world with us. They have families, emotions, culture. They are real, and they are amazing. The little ones I saved are now grown, living somewhere in the vast forests with their families. Maybe they have little ones of their own now. Maybe they're telling them about that strange winter, about the little one lost in a snowstorm and saved by a person living in a cabin. I hope the Bigfoot will do the same. I hope the story will be passed down through generations, just like the important stories are passed down through ours, because it matters. The bond between two different creatures, in a moment of compassion and trust, is more important than anything else. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I sit in my little house and I hear a sound outside, a soft call from far away, almost impossible to hear. Then I go to the window and listen. And sometimes I call back, just to let them know that I'm still here, still remembering, still grateful for what they taught me about kindness, family, and the wonders hidden beyond the boundaries of the ordinary world. The little Bigfoot I found frozen in the woods that night changed my life. The young Bigfoot taught me things I could never have learned from another human about survival, trust, and the many forms of intelligence and love. And every time I hold those warm carved stones in my pocket, I remember that this world is full of the impossible, wonderful, unimaginable things waiting for us to be open enough, brave enough, kind enough to explore. That's my story. The story of a logger who found a baby Bigfoot frozen in the woods and what happened next, which showed me a truth that most people will never know. They're out there. They are real. And they remember kindness, just like we do. That's all I can tell you. And that's all you need to know. To hear more interesting stories, stay tuned here